Dave, I got to tell you, I got a 50-pound package in the mail yesterday, and I want to thank you, quite honestly, for what was a beautiful book that I found inside. Thank you very much. You can see it right back here. You sent me the complete collection of Crazy Cat Sunday comics. And first of all, thank you for your thoughtfulness, but it's an absolutely gorgeous book. I've been pouring through it.
Well, that's kind of the reason why I got it for you. Not that you're some crazy fan of Crazy Cat, pardon the double use of crazy. Not that you're some huge fan of Crazy Cat. I mean, you love comic strips and the history of comic strips in general, but Taschen had this book sale and their 5,000-pound Crazy Cat book, because this book, for people not, obviously this is not a visual art, so podcasting, I'll explain it to you. It's like a 40-inch by 24-inch by 700-pound book of Crazy Cat comics. Right? Am I not wrong? Like, you get the truck backing up, it's like, beep, 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 here's your book, sir.
This is the first book I've ever gotten that comes with its own handle. You need a handle to carry this book from room to room.
You think Brad's joking. Like, because this book is so gigantic, Taschen has to ship it in, I forget what they call that specific kind of cardboard, like E-class cardboard, the cardboard that's like almost as thick as wood. Yeah. And then it had a freaking handle on it. So like, I was afraid to open the box because I was like, this is too nice. Even the box is too nice.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was opening it, and you remember when you were a kid and your grandmother used to get a Christmas gift and she would refuse to rip the paper because the paper was too pretty and you could always reuse it. So she would carefully peel the tape off, and you'd be like, Grandma, come on, just open your present. That was me opening, because it was such a special thing. I didn't want to, damage the cardboard. I'm pulling these tabs out like I'm an Egyptologist that's just found a mummy that's been unearthed.
Every layer is precious.
Yeah, and I'm like I've got butter knives out there. I'm lifting things just right. It was because it was too nice to just do what I would have done with anything else. Would have just rip into it.
Yeah. And so for those of you that don't know Taschen as a publisher, they occasionally dip a toe into comic books. Like they did the DC Comics, 50-year or Silver Age. They did a gigantic, and it won an Eisner. But occasionally they do, like, I have a Crazy Cat collection. I have I think a Gasoline Alley collection from them. I have a couple different, and they're all gigantic. So I got Brad this book because it was on sale. I'm just gonna be honest about it. It was I didn't pay $200. It was $50 for this book. But it was so like, don't think your friend spent $200 on you. But Taschen makes these gorgeous, gigantic books that, honest to God, Brad, as someone who does self-publishing, I'm not sure that they make a profit on their books. They are such beautiful objects of art that I know Taschen is like a 100 millionaire, and he's like just a lover of books and likes to produce art books. But I don't know that he makes any money on these. I think he loses his shirt, quite literally, on these books.
I've got to wonder about that, because number one, it's a super high unit cost. Number two, it's one of those things like, how many people want the complete Sunday comics of Crazy Cat? It's people like you and me, people who have a passion for comics, but general populace, I'm not quite so sure on that.
And all of his books are like that. It's like a niche of a niche. It's like, do you love German modernism architecture from the specific years of May 1952 to June 1952? Well, Taschen has the book for you. And it's like all these hyper-specific art books that literally cost them probably $30 a unit, which, if you know unit costs for books, are like really expensive. And then he has to ship them in these incredibly expensive packages. The replacement costs for books that get damaged in shipping are probably also ridiculous in terms of their overall budget.
Oh, yes.
I do not know how he keeps this business afloat, other than the fact that he's like, I lose $10 million a year on my publishing company. Who cares?
He writes off the loss and moves on,
But you know what? Instead of buying a yacht, how fun to have a publishing company that just makes beautiful art books.
That puts wonderful things out into the world,
Like, I'm not in any way judging him. Like, go ahead, lose your money, but it's certainly better than buying a seventh house or buying a boat. But if you haven't checked out Taschen, there's a few stores. There's one in New York. There's one in LA. I think there's one or two in, I think, Germany and London. you got to go to a Taschen store at some point in your life because the books are Donkey Kong. They are gigantic. They are huge. What are you laughing at? What?
Donkey Kong made me laugh.
Sorry. But yeah, they're crazy. And anyway, so I'm so glad you liked it. Not because you're some huge Crazy Cat fan, but just because, like, it's a cool book to have in your studio. Yeah. This 700-pound book of comic strips. And it's really neat.
And thank you for clarifying that you would never do a book like this, because we've already discovered that your idea of a 25th anniversary special is about 6 pages, 2 of which are blank. So thanks for keeping us on the straight and narrow with that one, letting us know you would not do a
Yeah, so
a
if
book
I get
like
a phone call from Taschen, I think he's German. He's going to be like, yeah, hello, David. I want to do a book with you. And I'm like, oh, Taschen, that's great. I'd love to do a book. Maximum 5 pages. What are you talking about? No, we need gold foil embossing. We need, double imprint. And it's like, oh, geez.
You can have gold foil embossing on the backs of the pages, not on the front where the art is.
Yeah, you can have it near the book. I don't want it on the book.
Actually, as far as I'll go, you can have my book on the shelf next to a book with golden foil embossing.
And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about humbly making comics.
And humbly making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, Dave Kellett, the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Strip.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. I am super excited for the show, legitimately super excited, because most of the questions are art related.
Yeah.
We try to mix in, business, art, philosophy of cartooning into different shows.
Yeah.
This show is mainly art directed, and I'm really excited about it. But before we jump in, I just got to give a reminder that this show is going out live right now to our super pals and backers over at patreon.com/comiclab at the live gab level.
Yes.
You too can watch the show streaming live every week. Right now, they're watching it live.
Yes.
And then, of course, it's recorded in the archive. So in case they miss it, in case their Taschen books arrive and it fell on them and they can't get up without help. Yeah, they can't get up without help. They're waiting for the kids to come home from school to help daddy out from underneath the book, which happened to me once. But anyway. So you can join us at the live gab level over at patreon.com/comiclab, and it's a legit fun thing to have you. And Bradley, so let's get started. Let's dive right into the show, my friend.
Absolutely. Before we get too much further, we have to thank our sponsors, the nice people at Wacom at WACOM.com. And Dave, I got something really great to share. You know how we always kind of open up the show talking about how we like Wacom? Well, this came in from a listener, and I could not wait to share it with you. Listen to this. This comes in from listener George Mackay, who says, a neighbor of mine asked me last year about drawing tablets for their daughter, and I immediately recommended the Wacom One. I don't even own one or have never seen one. I own a Cintiq, however, but based on your glowing and joyous reviews, I knew it was a safe bet. My neighbor came back to me just the other day to tell me she absolutely adores the Wacom One, and the daughter is constantly creating. So thank you guys for that. So this is a testimonial from a Comic Lab listener about the Wacom One.
You know what's really heartwarming to hear? That's great to hear that our word is our bond on this one, because we actively use it and love it ourselves. But I also recommended this to someone who their little one wanted to start drawing.
Yeah.
By little one, I mean they were 18. Why am I saying little one? That makes it sound weird. They weren't 4. Their teenager wanted to start drawing digitally, and they said, "What do you recommend?"
Yeah.
And I said, honestly, the Wacom One, the price point on that, especially because at the time around Christmas it was on sale.
Yeah.
It was amazing to jump in on, and it's worked out great for this. So George, I'm so happy that that recommendation worked out for you in your life. And just a reminder to our friends. You can check out Wacom over at WACOM.com at the Wacom One headquarters.
Yes. So let's jump right into it. Our opening question comes in about some advice we have given in the past about flipping an image, either in the mirror or if it's digital, just literally flipping it to find the flaws. And here's somebody who's struggling with it. They say, this might be a bit of a novice question, but how do you correct a sketch once you flipped it? I draw a cool looking character in a pose that I like, and I flip it to see that it looks off and a bit wonky. So I make some changes, but any changes I make, once I flip it back, make the original sketch to look off as well, ruining what I thought was pretty cool in the first place. It's bloody frustrating. Any tips?
Yeah. The tips are: step 1, find bridge. Step 2, throw self off bridge. No, I say that because this is something that's universal. We have all had this, where you're like, it's a sketch you're feeling pretty good with, and then you in Photoshop or in Clip Studio or even with the mirror, like Brad said, you flip it, and you're like, I want to see what it looks like from the other direction. The old the tried and true method of flipping a drawing. You flip it, and suddenly it looks like you drew the whole thing with the wrong hand.
All of a sudden, you hear that sound effect. Ooh. And you hear an eye up here and a nose on the back of the head, and it's like, what was I thinking?
Yeah, exactly. It does sound like the bad music on Wheel of Fortune or on Price is Right. That kind of thing. This is a universal. We all have this. And part of this comes, really the only solution is time and practice.
Yeah.
With a specific drawing, you flipped it, you fixed it, you flip it back, you realize that the fixes have somehow made it worse, which is so frustrating. And when that starts to happen, that's usually a signal that you haven't yet internalized the physics of that character in a way that makes it natural in both directions. And so give yourself a little credit that time and tide will fix that the more you draw them. But usually what I do, Brad, is I just commit to whatever the first sketch was, because it's usually my stronger side in terms of the angle that I chose. And so I don't allow myself to fall into the pit of fixing the fix to fix the fix to fix the fix to fix the fix, because then I just end up watering down whatever stronger point that I made. If I like the original drawing and in flipping it makes me upset, I don't go down the rat hole of fixing the fix to fix the fix. How about you?
This is a question that just came up, so I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So I'm doing an illustration. I flip it. I see that it's all wrong. Do you make the fix on the flip, or do you flip it back to make the fix?
I go back to what I control Z my way back to or control Z my way back to.
So this might be where we're. So I make the fix on the flip. This is starting to sound like a Seinfeld.
By the way, this sounds like a weird Seinfeld sketch. What's with the flip? I fixed the flip.
You got to make the fix on the flip, George. Who are these people, and what is the deal with airline food?
By the way, this is two of, I think we can all agree, two of the best Jerry Seinfeld impersonations you've ever heard. This is spot on. Not a note need be given. We know already these are note perfect Jerry Seinfelds that we're doing.
Nailed it. No, but I make the fix while I've still got it flipped, and then I flip it back.
I make the fix while I still let it flip. Okay.
So in other words, I've got the original. Now I flipped it. Now we'll call that the mirror version. I make the fix while I'm in mirror mode and then flip it back.
Okay, but now how does that not become a recursive nightmare of fixing the fix to fix the fix to fix the fix?
I don't know. Listen, part of the solution is I've got a very short attention span. So once I've flipped a couple times, I'm like, that must be good. It's time to move on.
Brad is like his crows. He keeps a tiny ball of aluminum off to the side of his desk so that if he's flipping too much, he looks over and goes, oh, shiny object. And then he's just distracted for a minute. And then it's back to drawing.
That or I would say no matter which of those you're doing, if you feel like you keep having problems, do the opposite. Like if you're not fixing the flip, then try fixing the flip. And vice versa.
We sound bonkers bananas right now. If you're not fixing the flip the fix, and then flip the fix to fix the flip.
Well, then my second advice is gonna delight you because it's very, very straightforward. Time for a silhouette. Go back to Wally Wood's 22 panels that always work and choose one.
This is a time for Wally Wood. Da-da-da-da. All right, we're going to a newspaper headline. Cartoonist gives up. So for those of you that don't know, Wally Wood put out all these panels that you can go to but both to liven up a boring story, but also in a situation like this where you try to draw a damn thing and you're like, oh, to hell with it. I'm going to use a different Wally Wood panel that works. And you're like, all right, a long shot that has a silhouette and a sun setting. That's what I'm doing.
Did you see on Twitter just recently somebody did the 22 panels that Wally Wood says always works, did them on cookies?
Wait, what?
They did the 22 panels on cookies with white frosting and then like a dark, maybe a chocolate frosting for the line art, recreated the 12 panels that always works on cookies. They've now become 22 cookies that I want to eat.
Yeah. So Brad is presenting a third option, which is if you get really frustrated by trying to fix the flip, the third option is just to go eat cookies.
Yes.
And I think that's actually one of the strongest possibilities you can have here. Give up and go eat sugar. That's the best one to do.
Do you know how many of my problems have been solved with cookies? You don't even want to know. No, I think first of all, if we're going to give a serious answer here, number one, understand that everybody struggles with this. And sometimes I'll give you a true third answer. Sometimes I just start from scratch again. I'll save that layer in case I need it later, start a whole new layer. Or if I'm working analog with ink, I'll grab a whole new sheet of paper and I'll just start fresh. Because sometimes you notice this, Dave, like if you erase a pencil sketch, it's still kind of there. And then when you try to correct it, you fall right into those same lines again.
Yep.
So I'll just grab a fresh sheet of paper and start new. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm clearly not getting this. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, because otherwise you become like those Roman horse carts that have to follow the path down the stone road because all the wheels have dug a ditch. Boy, that was a weird historical metaphor to bring out. Why did I do that?
It was fun to watch
Brad,
you run out
just
of...
like a Roman horse cart. That's, I think we can all agree.
Yes, of course, I can't remember. I can't tell you how many times I've been in that situation.
Is this you? Have you been at your drawing desk and thought to yourself, this is like a Roman horse cart? Oh,
and watch you just run out of breath at the end of the sentence too. It can be like those Roman horse carts.
Roman horse carts. I got a Roman horse cart. Okay. So here's another solution. I think Brad is right. So start a completely fresh sketch.
Yes.
I will say another possibility, which is put that sketch aside and then draw the mirror direction, same drawing, but now draw fresh the mirror direction, flip it back, see what you get.
Oh, maybe.
Sometimes that can at least inform what your natural inclination direction would have done or would not have done. So there's different possibilities to do here, but don't feel like you're alone.
No.
This is a very universal thing, and good luck with that, I think. Well, by the way, Brad, do you notice this ridiculous mason jar that I'm drinking water out of?
I refuse to drink out of a mason jar, by the way.
This 1,000% looks like I'm just drinking moonshine that Paul made down.
It really does.
Paul done made some moonshine down by the creek, and I got some moonshine for the show. This is how we supplement our income.
I used to date a girl who made moonshine, but I loved her still. So now that we're
all right,
now that we're done flipping out over that first question, Dave, do we have another question from a Patreon backer?
We absolutely do, Brad. All right, so our next question comes in from Chris over at patreon.com/ComicLab. I could almost pronounce ComicLab. I became very Midwestern there. ComicLab. Chris writes, in today's online market, all things being equal, and the strip is good, do you feel a comic should be more generic to reach a wider audience and provide more material and freedom to write whatever comes to mind, or more specific in subject to target a specific demographic, but which limits the possibilities? And if you went the second route, would a seasonal strip work better? Meaning do a month's worth of strips, then take a break, and then return for another season? Brad, this is a great question, and it's very specific to what we do, which is great. So, Brad, do you go generic? Do you go specific? Do you go broad? Do you go small? How do you square up Chris's question on this one?
I go niche all the way, and I'll tell you why. Back in the early days of webcomics, the answer was just the opposite. And by the way, Dave and I both did this, right? Try to go as general as possible because the idea was to cast a wide net, build a wide and broad audience so that you could serve a lot of ads. And the more ads you served, the more money you made. These days, comics are monetized exactly the opposite, and interest is expressed exactly the opposite. I'm going to tell you what both those things mean. Number one, monetization. You've got two ways of monetizing a strip. With the broad audience, you can do a support-based Patreon and then play the numbers game. If you've got 100,000 readers, then you can count on maybe 0.5% or 1% of them to throw you a couple bucks on Patreon. And you can, if your readership is large enough, you can do well. But mostly I'm going to argue that comics are funded through people who are passionate about what you're doing. And that's maybe not going to come as a result of a general broad comic. It's going to be a comic that speaks to that person's passion or something that is underserved in the marketplace. This is the only place I can find this comic or this kind of storytelling. And people are going to be more likely to become a Patreon backer when you're doing something that they are passionate about. And that's going to come through a niche comic.
I totally agree with you. Passion is everything online, because if the internet were like a cigar chomping movie mogul, they're not looking at you going, what do you got for me that's bland? What do you got for me? What do you got for me that appeals to everybody but kind of nobody? You know, like I want 80-year-old women and 5-year-old boys to love the same comic strip. You got something like that for me? It's got to be about people on desert islands and golf jokes. Can you do that? You're like,
well, truly, if those kind of things were marketable in today's internet, newspaper comics would have made a very graceful transition over into doing what we do on the web. But you don't see a whole lot of newspaper comics thriving on the web. It's because of this very thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the market that comic strips arose from, they arose in what was attempting to be a mass market newspapers, where they did get read by 80-year-olds and 5-year-olds. And so they wanted something that A, offended nobody, and B, was at least pleasantly a delightful pastime for both. So the highest ideal of that was probably Peanuts or Calvin and Hobbes, right? Enough joy, enough, and it wasn't an accident that both spectrums of, or all spectrums of comic strips ended up defaulting to kid comic strips and animal comic strips, because both 80-year-olds and 5-year-olds still love animals and kids, right? You know, it was much rarer thing to have a comic strip like Pickles, which was more specific to older people. And so what I'm getting at is the business model in the internet is not specifically a mass market. It is largely appealing to niches. It's largely appealing to passions, whatever the passions are. I mean, just look at how something like Reddit is set up. It's all subreddits of different passions, and yes, things trickle up to the top. But all those passions are what people go for. They go for, I want the specific subreddit on woodworking in 18th century Germany. You know, and you're like, all right, well, here's a subreddit for that. You know, that kind of thing. And so the reason why Hark a Vagrant worked is because historians loved it. The reason why SMBC works is because STEM people love it. You know, all those comics appeal to a passion. And so I could list a whole bunch of web comics that appeal to a specific passion, but you take the point, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And also that comes right into that second thing that I wanted to talk about a moment ago. And that is not only monetization, but audience building. That's another place where niche power is going to get you through. In other words, we talk all the time about social media. What's your share thought? What's the reason somebody would share this post? Well, if you've got a generic comic that again, like Dave said, is going to be very acceptable to a wide group of people, but is as a natural outcropping of that somewhat bland, or just has a topic that is not very appealing at all, it's not going to get shared, right? Whereas a niche, what am I going to share? Something that speaks to my niche. So let's go right to the heart of it. I'm going to share something that when I share it, nobody else has seen anything like that because it's in my passion, right? I'm going to share that one thing that's like, oh my God, I can't believe I found this. I'm going to share it. Am I going to share a golf joke that I've seen 100 different iterations of? Maybe not. Am I going to share that one thing about superheroes that's a great take on what's going on because it speaks to my passion for that? Yeah, that I'm going to share.
So I want to call a tenderfoot timeout real quick because I have to change topics. There is a word in the English language that I have never pronounced right, and I've heard now you mispronounce it 3 times too, and that word is niche. I say niche, I say niche, I say niche. You have done all 3 too. What the hell is the right pronunciation of this word?
I've actually looked it up, and niche and niche are both acceptable pronunciations.
They're both acceptable.
Yes.
Now, is niche acceptable only because Americans bastardized it, and so eventually Webster's is like, fuck it, niche is fine. You know, if you made ain't a word, then niche is fine. We don't, geez, we're trying to regulate the English language, you dumb idiots. Are fine, we'll use niche now.
You just described 60% of English language etymology. is grammarians throwing their hands up and saying, that's it, we give in, do it your way.
You know how Webster's always makes a big show of the press release every year of like, here's 40 new words we're adding to the dictionary. Every year that they have that list, I see their head dictionaryist or whatever they call them, head linguist. You can feel it going, fuck it, really? Sussy baka? That's now an English phrase? Damn it, I'm not including that in the English language. Why have to include sussy baka now? You idiots, you illiterate idiots. I have read every work of Shakespeare. I can quote Coriolanus. Why are you making me put sussy baka into the dictionary? I hate you people. I hate you.
Yeah, but there it is. Yeah, you can sense the frustration. They're just like, that's it. Yeah. We give up. It's like our first listener who's flipped that illustration 10 times. They're just like, that's it. It's silhouette time. This is the English language equivalent of that.
Yeah, the exact opposite is the French with the Académie Française that's like, no, you are not calling it le web. No, you are not. Whereas English, the dictionary folks in English are like, fuck it, I guess we're using this word. Ain't is now a word. You idiots, we tried to fight it for 150 years, but now we're including ain't in the dictionary. Oh, I hate you people. You could just feel the frustration from English dictionary people. Okay, so both niche and niche are legit then. Okay, because for years I thought I pronounced it niche, and then someone goes, no, David, it's pronounced niche, and I was like, shit, it's one of those words. Yeah.
No, not only is niche and niche acceptable in pronunciation, I think they're acceptable in publication. I think if you've got a question between the two, I'm going to encourage you to go to niche. Now, we've got a second part of that question. What?
Good transition. You're just smooth.
I'm the king of transitions over here.
You're like a drive time DJ increasingly. You're just like, all right, Dave's driving us off the trails. I'm going to get us back on the road.
I've got a note here. As soon as Dave starts doing French accents, time to move the show along.
Well, Dave's on another anti-French tirade. Here we go.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about this because it's a great question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. If you were to go to second route, actually, I'm going to say anything. If you're going to go any route, would a seasonal strip work better? Meaning a month's worth of strips, then take a break and then return for another season. Let's talk about seasonal strips, Dave. It's way outside our wheelhouse. But let's talk about it anyway. That's never stopped us before. Let's talk about seasonal strips.
That's never stopped us before. I like that attitude. Like, listen, I don't know anything about 401k investing. Doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about it. Here we go, gang. Here's Brad and Dave's 401k tips for you this week.
Get your checkbooks.
So as far as seasonality, this, I have to say, I think Carl Kerschel and Scott Kurtz started this a few years ago where they intentionally said, now I'm in season 2. Like I think with Table Titan, Scott did this, right? Or where he said, now I'm in season 1, season 2, season 3. And the idea was sort of pick up on TV seasons. But I think this question from Chris is more talking about seasonality, like times of the year or moods of the year. Is that how I'm reading this right?
And specifically with gaps between publishing, like he'll do a month of strips and then do a month, no strips. And then maybe another month of strips, or maybe, you could break it up any way you want. Maybe 3 months of strips and then 3 months of no strips. Right. So you're publishing and then you're taking a break from publishing and then it's the next season. What do you think about that concept?
I mean, is the idea here that you can't miss me if I never go away? So why don't I go away for a little bit? And then you'd be like, oh, I sure did love Brad Geiger. I wish he'd come back. Kind of. Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. There's part of me that really likes the idea about a seasonal comic where you say, okay, I'm going to take some time and polish this thing up. And when I release it, I'm going to release it in one, maybe even like the way streaming services do, release it in a binge. So you could read the whole thing right now, but then there's going to be no more Brad Geiger for another 3 weeks or another 3 months. And at my pace, maybe another 3 years until it's time for the next release. My big concern with that is how do you keep your audience in the interim? Right. How do you keep those people interested? And you can only do so much with sketches and stuff. I do see some people, and they're mostly people who have print, like corporate print projects that they're doing, Marvel, DC, stuff like that. I see them doing this sort of thing. I don't know how successful they are because I don't have access to those numbers. But my fear as a creator would be you'd have to really pour some creativity into audience building and audience keeping while you're off season.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where we circle back to Chris's earlier question. We talk about passion again, because seasonality only works if someone cares enough to come back or seek you out or sign up for the email reminder or check in even when it's just sketches. If you're generalized and bland, they're like, it's one of a dozen. I can skip it and who cares, right? Yeah. But like, I can only speak for myself here in terms of something that's unintentionally seasonal. Saga, the science fiction comic, right, from Image, that's been, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years. I don't even know at this point how long it's been on sort of a hiatus. I will jump back in as soon as they're back with it because I'm passionate about it. It's a great story. The art is beautiful. I want to jump back in. But if someone's like, Dave, High and Lois is on hiatus, it's not like I'm like, gotta wait for, when are they coming back? When is High and Lois coming back? I miss it.
When am I going to find out how Thirsty did at the golf club?
Thirsty. Oh my God. That was Chef's Kiss perfect. Yeah. You knew the most obscure character from High and Lois. Oh my God. This is like you with, what was that one? Hokey Wolf? Holy shit. Sometimes your knowledge of obscure comics characters far outstrips mine, and I'm so impressed. I just have to bow down at that. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is passion is, if you're going to do seasonality, it damn well have better generated passion, or else people aren't going to check back in. They're not going to keep track if you ever come back, you know? And so, yes, seasonality can work. I've seen it done, both in terms of seasons of the year and seasons like a TV season for comics. And we've also just seen general hiatus. Doonesbury took a hiatus. Calvin Hobbes took a hiatus, right? Like I said before, Saga's taking a hiatus. And if people care about it, they'll come back, but there's got to be the passion. Go ahead, Brad.
I'm gonna take my own tenderfoot time out here. You cannot bring in Doonesbury and Calvin because they had a built-in audience,
a captured audience.
Yeah, it's like they could come back because they knew the audience was going to be there. The audience had to be there. It was their newspaper, right?
I immediately defer to you on that. You are correct. That was a very different business model that already had captured the audience broadly via newspaper. They were still subscribing. Yes, of course, agreed.
But I would say number one, I'm sure if I widen my purview, I'd find people doing this. Just because I can't name them off the top of my head doesn't mean that they don't exist. I'm not like that person that says, well, it's impossible to succeed at comics unless you started 15 years ago. And they're like, you tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, what about webtoons? I don't want to be that person.
Well, it's funny you should mention Webtoons because Webtoons actually has more of a feeling of seasonality and chapter breaks that traditional webcomics did not have. So that's a great point that Webtoons actually has it.
Yeah. And what I would say was, I think you could do that. I think you can do that. I think you'd want to definitely set up your own website as a hub. So you'd have a central place for all those things to be, so that, for example, you could play the long game on this. And as you're building up things, you bring somebody in for this vampire story that you did. While they're at the hub, they discover this fairy tale you did about mermaids. And then, you know what I mean? You can keep playing that knock-on effect where you just build your own library that's all housed there. It would be a long, you'd be playing the long game, but it could be done. And then every time, you're gonna build a little bit more steam. And you can use things like Dave intimated, the email newsletter, the mailing list, your social media to let those people know when the next thing comes out. I think it's possible. I think it's absolutely possible. I think you've got to think through your publishing very carefully, though.
Yeah, and Brad's final words there are the ones that really ring true for me because, of course, your creative needs are going to play a part in this. Do you have to write seasonality?
Yes, I agree.
I had a little bit of a drink before we started the show. Anyway, seasonality. Are you writing seasonality because creatively you need that? It's the only way that it can work? Okay, well, great. That's one consideration. But then the business consideration is a totally different thing, which is most of what we do these days is doing crowd-funded patronage or crowd-funded Kickstarter, or in general, just book publishing and tchotchke publishing, right? And all of those require a passion that will come around when you need it. And so that's why I think Brad is very rightly concerned that your seasonality might kick you in the teeth when it comes time to kickstart a book or ask for recurring patronage or this or that, because those business models don't necessarily go marry well with a comic that's like, we're taking off 6 months, we're taking off a month, whatever it is. Some people, rightly so, might discontinue their patronage for those 6 months. Rightly so. It's their money. They can say, you're not making anything, I'm not paying for anything.
No monthly reward, no monthly pledge.
Right. So anyway, is it possible? Yes. Have we seen it done occasionally? Is it ultimately a smart business model? I don't think so. I think you want to build. Even though Brad and I would not argue for the 7-day-a-week business model that we used to have, which is a new comic every day, we would still argue that you got to be on people's radar somewhat on a recurring basis. I think it's very it's very easy to be forgotten in this day and age when there's so much content coming down the pike. Yep, absolutely true. And that's why passion is so important.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, it's time for a couple of updates, and one of them has to do with predictions we made in a recent show. As you remember, I predicted that Patreon was going to launch a competitor to Kickstarter in the first quarter of 2002, and that has not happened yet, but...
and my prediction has fallen on its face.
But we have had our first competitor. I was in the right church, wrong pew, as they say in the Midwest. TopatoCo has launched the first Kickstarter competitor of 2022. As you know, TopatoCo is a company with deep webcomics roots. Web cartoonist Jeffrey Rowland formed the company way back in, I think, 2004, when he was selling shirts and stickers and other merchandise linked to his webcomic. Later expanded it. In 2013, they launched Make That Thing. Do you remember that? That was a fulfillment service for independent creators. So you've got a company that is already very, very good at not only crowdfunding, but merchandise fulfilling and handling all of those purchasing things online. They've already got all the bones they need to bring out a Kickstarter competitor, and they did just last week. They announced TopatoCo, a crowdfunding counterpart that's going to use everything that they've got at their beck and call as a company. And their first crowdfunding campaign is a plush of the TopatoCo. What do you call those? I'm blanking on the word.
This is amazing. I'm going to let it happen. It's mascot. Mascot is the word you're looking for.
They're going to have a mascot plushie. So all of which to say for our first update of 2 today that we've got our first Kickstarter competitor, and it's coming from webcomics.
And not to talk too much about it, because not much is yet able to be said because it's very new. But one thing that I would keep an eye on with the TopatoCo versus Kickstarter in the future is TopatoCo, unlike Kickstarter, has the ability to do the storage and the fulfillment from their own facility. And so for a certain kind of city-dwelling cartoonist in a condo or an apartment that can't take 4 pallets of books as delivery, this might be an interesting option going forward. I have not seen any of the evidence to that, but I think with their own abilities to do fulfillment around the world, it would be interesting to see what TopatoCo is able to do when paired with a Kickstarter-type business model.
Absolutely. So that's going to be one to watch. And, my spidey sense says that there are going to be others coming down the pike as well. But we've had our first one, and that's exciting. Update number 2, David, did you know what today is? We're recording this show on Tuesday, February 1st, and that means that it's a very special day. Did you know what that day is?
Is this the day that I tell Brad he's a great guy? Because that's what I thought today was.
No, that's every other day.
Oh.
No, today is Hourly Comics Day. And I remember from a little while ago, you were talking.
Awkward moment for me. I totally forgot.
So I guess that should answer my next question. Are you going to be doing and participating in Hourly Comics Day?
Don't mind me pulling on my collar as I go, I totally forgot about it. No, here's the truth, is I forget about 24-hour Comics Day. I forget about Hourly Comics Day. I forget. I every year they come and go and I go, oops, oh yeah, that exists. Yeah. Because and this is in the best possible way, there's no insult intended, I'm producing enough where I don't need one of those right now in my life. In fact, it's a distraction from things that I actively have to produce. So I'm doing Anatomy of Dinosaurs. I'm doing Drive. I've got podcasts. I've got other stuff going on in my life. I don't need that. Are you doing it? Is this your way of asking me to ask you? Are you doing it so that you can go, well, I do have some news?
No, I'm not so much going to do Hourly Comics Day. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I've got lots of things to keep my busy, and it would probably be a bit of a distraction. But I will be following it like everybody else. I'll be checking in on the hashtag and seeing what everyone's doing, because that can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to look at it. And again, Brad and I have slightly differing opinions on whether they're worthwhile doing. I think if it gets you creating, that is the one singular and most important thing about 24-hour Comics Day, Hourly Comics Day, Inktober, whatever the competition, quote unquote, is for you. If it gets you creating and helps you stay creating, then that's all the justification you need. Anyway, let's jump in on our next question, Bradley. This comes in from J Lark over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And I know everyone listening is a patron. J Lark writes, hey, Brad and Dave, let's talk about bonus panels. Many comics have a bonus panel that is detached from the rest of the comic. It usually contains an extra punchline, a callback, or something else extra for the reader. Some comics put on their bonus panel behind a paywall like Patreon, but I've also seen them in the artist's Instagram story, after the ads, in an image carousel, etc. The common theme, though, is that they usually serve as a reward for the reader doing something extra beyond simply reading the comic. What are your thoughts on bonus panels and how to use them most effectively? Thanks so much for the fabulous show, J Lark. All right, so Brad, J Lark's question, bonus panels. What do you got for us, my friend? What are your thoughts, first of all, about bonus panels?
It's something that I don't think I would ever do personally. Like, I don't know how I would fit that into what I do. However, I do see it being done. Chris Halbeck does bonus panels in his comic and uses them really, really well. I don't do them. However, I think that it's a really good idea and has a lot of versatility that could be applied in a number of different ways. And if it's something that you're thinking about and you think you've got a great way to apply it, I would encourage you to do it, because I think it could have a lot of usefulness. So although you're never going to necessarily see me do it, I think it's something that if you're thinking about it, I think you should go ahead and give it a try.
Yeah, I largely agree with you. I for whatever reason, I have never done it myself, but I think it is technologically speaking, it's one of the fun innovations that digital comics have allowed for, that traditional print comics didn't really have a way to make that work. So you get everything from an extra button on a website that launches a bonus panel. On Instagram, it'll be something after the ads. On Webtoons, it'll be a far distant scroll from past the earlier, panels, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so you've seen different iterations of this, but all of it requires a little bit of digital trickery to get you one extra panel. And it's kind of fun to see, because when my wife writes sitcoms, one of the fun things about standing on the floor of the sitcom, Brad, is that you'll have all the writers there, and if a joke doesn't land with an audience, you see them immediately go huddle, 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 and then 5 more pitches, and then they'll take 5 more cuts, right? They'll try this joke out, they'll try that, and they're what's called alts in the sitcom business, right? They'll write alts really quickly, and some of them are already pre-prepared. And if joke A doesn't work, joke B could work. And a little bit, that's what bonus panels feel like to me. It's like, hey, if the main joke didn't land for you, maybe I'll get you with the bonus panel. And even if it did land for you, maybe this is a little extra cream in your coffee to get the bonus panel too, you know? And so I kind of like that, technologically speaking. I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. And I can there's a part of me, I just got to be honest with you, that there's a part of me that says, listen, which one is the punchline? There's either a good one or there's a not so good one. And you go with the good one. And then you don't, after you figure out what the good one is, you don't give your audience the bad one afterwards. There's a part of me that has a little bit of problem with it, even though I know that you brought up a really good point when we were talking before the show about political cartoons, right?
Yeah. So for those of you that know American political cartooning, there's 2 cartoonists specifically that actually do this in single panel political cartoons, editorial cartoons. Oliphant, the Australian/American cartoonist, had a little character named Oliphant that was kind of penguinish looking. He had a big nose, and he would be in the bottom right corner and make a commentary on whatever the commentary was of the strip, right? Yeah. And then Tom Tolles, who I think retired, but wasn't he in Toledo or Ohio? Where was he?
New York Times, I believe.
Oh, New York Times.
by the time he ended up. Yeah.
Sorry, Tom. But Tom Tolles also had a tiny little sketch of Tom at his drawing desk that would also comment in the bottom right corner. And I think we can all agree that's a fun iteration on editorial cartoonists, that you could have a comment on a comment, but it was different than how these bonus panels worked.
And that's but yet thematically the same. Because
exactly. Thematically the same.
Because here's the thing: after I got done saying, listen, just choose a punchline, and which there's a good one and there's not. After saying that, you're like, yeah, but that's kind of like political cartoons. And you just named 2 of my all-time favorite political cartoonists. Tom Tolles could he could draw a page from the phone book and I would laugh at it. You know, he was, I really think he was amazing. And I lived for what happened in that little corner of his comic. So but would I tell Tom Tolles to say, listen, choose a punchline, buddy? Probably not. Right. You know, so I do think that even though I kind of find myself drawing away from it, that doesn't mean that it's bad. I think you could find a number of creative ways to put that to good use and do it well. Now, before we go too much further, we've got to draw a line between that and doing an exclusive comic. Because there's a difference between doing a bonus panel and doing an entire exclusive comic, or which is something you hear me say all the time. I want you to consider doing for Patreon an exclusive comic. That's a whole nother thing. That's an entire chunk of storytelling. What we're talking about here is one panel that relates to usually a short form presentation, like a strip or something like that. They give you 1 extra panel. Let's not confuse the 2, because the 2 are very, very different. Because I could see somebody saying, well, wait a minute, Brad, you do Evil Inc. After Dark. That's a bonus. Well, not so much. What we're talking about is one short piece of storytelling that you put a little bump note at the end. I can never ever see myself doing it, but I think you could do it and make it perfectly great. And some of my all-time heroes did it all the time.
Yeah. I have a couple more thoughts about bonus panels. One is, if you're someone who loves iterating on jokes, like I love joke A and here's also joke B, I think a bonus panel is for you. Yeah. If you're the kind of person that there's certain kind of jokes, Brad, where you can't get to joke B unless you've seen joke A. Right. It's kind of a stand-up comedian route of like, did you like that joke? Here's an iteration on that joke. Yeah. And so I get it when people want to do a bonus panel of a joke, because you couldn't have gotten to B unless you had already laughed at A, right? Yeah. So I get that. But one thing to consider is I think bonus panels only work for comedy in this sense. If you're writing a dramatic story and you have a bonus panel on the dramatic story, well, you need to ask yourself, Did that bonus panel, was that part of the story? Did it advance the drama? Well, then it needs to be part of the story. You know what I mean? It's not a bonus then that people need to hunt down. It should be part of the story. And then you need to also ask yourself, how am I going to present this in a book? Which, by the way, is also a question for comedy. If it is part of the drama, if it is part of the buildup of plot or character or story, that needs to be in the book. Well, then how are you going to present that as a non-bonus, but definitely part of the story panel? Well, then just make it a panel of the... Anyway, what I'm getting at is, I think this idea of a bonus panel only works for comedy. And then even then, for print, you have to ask yourself, how am I going to present this in a way that doesn't just feel like two punchline panels that are fighting against each other? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. This is, I would suggest, and by the way, tell me if this is sounding familiar to you. You've done the comic, you've done all the stuff that you'd colored it, you edited it, and so on and so forth. It's a few days later, and it's time for you to put it up on your website. And you put it up, and now, if you're using a CMS like most of us, you've got to give it a title. You've got to write something. You've got to give it a headline, a title, something. And you're writing the title, and all of a sudden, as you're coming up with something to say, you write something funnier than your punchline, or as funny as your punchline, right? Yeah. That happens sometimes. That happens. And by the way, if that happens, it means that maybe you need to do some more editing, to build that into your creative process. But be that as it may, and it happens to me all the time. If that happens to you, maybe that's a good indication that you could try this and let that part of the creative process form your bonus panel. In other words, don't make the bonus panel right away. Wait a couple days and then make it part of your process to come up with that bonus panel on a day later. In a way, it dovetails nicely with my one more panel suggestion that I have for people who are struggling writing strips. Do one more panel. You're going to find the funnier thing there.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
In that respect, the idea is then to edit it back down to its original panel count, not to just tack stuff on. But you could use that same mentality to come up with something for that bonus panel. But then, like Dave says, you're right back to the beginning of, okay, which punchline goes in the book? Which one is the punchline?
Right. But I arguing against myself here. I think, though, the idea that, to Jay Lark's question, that this is sort of a reward for the dedicated reader, I actually think is true, because you read the comics. If it's on Instagram, you go through a couple of ads, or if it's a website and you hit that button, then you get this little moose bouche of couscous at the very end, you know, and it's just like, it's this nice little thing that's a treat for the dedicated reader, or something that's discovered. And that's kind of fun. But yes, again, to Brad's point, in print, what the hell do you do? How do you make that feel special or unique or a reward-like system without it becoming just like, and here's 2 joke panels, that kind of thing? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's so I guess here's the thing. I see it being done all the time. I see it being done and being done marvelously. And I think you could do it if you want to try it. I do want you to give a little bit of thought to some of those other things, like what's going to happen when the book comes out and stuff like that, because I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all answer to it, in the same way that there's not a one-size-fits-all method of doing the bonus panel. It's going to come out of a natural outcropping of your creativity. My only final word of advice is to think through how this is going to affect your comic in the final iteration, that print product, which is one of your big revenue streams. Think through how that's going to happen before you commit to it, and find a creative solution for that too.
Amen. All right, Brad, well, moving us on to the next question. This comes in from Melissa over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And Melissa writes, "Dear Brad and Dave, I'm having an artistic identity crisis. For years, I have worked most traditionally and am known for my particular coloring style. However, despite years of practice, my inking has never improved, and I'm always messing up my lines with my artist's hands." That sounds like my haircuts. After recently acquiring a tablet and learning CSP, I find that I can produce much cleaner ink lines digitally and at a much faster pace. Finally, my comic art looks like the level I want it to be, but I can't let go of the dream of making beautiful ink lines on paper like I see from other traditional inkers. Which way should I go? Make a better product faster that I'll be happier with in the long run, or stick to my guns and have more fun with the creative process? Many thanks for all the advice, laughs, and great magnets, Melissa. All right. Well, Brad, Melissa has a really great question that I don't think we've ever addressed before, which is that you love coloring in traditional mediums. And Melissa didn't mention it, but let's assume like watercolor or Conte crayon or something, or, pencils, colored pencils, something fun and traditional. But Melissa was never happy with her line art in ink. Moves to digital with all the tools and perhaps smoothing or things like that she has in the digital realm, loves the line art, is doing it faster, and is happier with the final result. What do you recommend in this situation, Brad?
Okay, for me, this is a no-brainer.
Okay.
I'm going to slam the door shut on this one.
Brad's answer is bonus panels. Have you considered bonus panels?
Yes. I've come full circle. Everything is bonus panels. No, this is a simple one. You do the thing that gives you the better product at the end. You do the thing that gives you the better art, because that's all your readers care about. They care about what is the best iteration of this comic. What's the best outcome, the best writing, and the best art. That's all they care about. And as a comics artist, trying to build an audience, that is very important to you. Listen to a couple sentences here where I think you already know the answer to the question. Listen to this. I found that I can produce much cleaner ink lines digitally and at a much faster pace. Finally, my comic art looks like the level I want it to be. End of story. You know what the answer is. You got to move to digital. It's giving you better products. It's giving you better everything. You've got to look at what you're doing and realize that. Here's the last thing. Look at this. Do I make a better product faster? The answer to that question is, and always shall be, yes.
I guess
that's exactly what you do.
I suppose let's transpose this to another industry. If Ford came to us and Brad, they were like, I can build the F-150 faster, cheaper, and better if I use this kind of manufacturing. But we like building trucks the other way. You'd be like, what are you doing? Build the F-150 faster, cheaper, and better. Maybe what's the holdup here is Melissa's and all of ours shared romanticism for the idea of traditional mediums. Yes. And there's nothing wrong. I say this as someone who draws one of my comics with traditional medium, even though we color it digitally, is that there absolutely is that love for a physical thing that you can hold up at the end and say, I made this. This is a piece of art that I made. And there's a certain intangibility that digital stuff has that physical stuff doesn't have. And so absolutely, there's a romanticism, there's a joy, there's a physicality to it that digital misses. But I think Brad is onto something here when he describes it as like, I can produce a better product, I can produce it faster, and my readers like it better. Well, then the one limitation then is your self-perception that you need to be working in watercolors or pencils or Conte crayons or whatever it was. And so, well, Brad, how is there a way that Melissa might be able to meld the best of both worlds here?
Well, she might be able to do her inking in a digital format and then print it out to do her coloring. She could do that. And the other thing that I'm going to suggest is just because you've started to do your comic in a digital format doesn't mean that you can't take a couple hours every week and do some traditional inking with a brush, right? You can still have that. You can still pursue that. You can still develop that skill and do quite nicely at it over time. And then maybe you'd have the flexibility of shifting back and forth. So you don't have to. This doesn't mean giving up on inking. It just means that you're going to do the comic in the format that gives you the best possible product. And then maybe on the weekends you ink, or for special projects you inks, or even, you know me, I'm always sniffing around for the exclusive. Maybe this becomes a Patreon exclusive or a Kickstarter reward or any number of other things where you need something physical or would prefer something physical. Right. Now you've got a whole stack of them because you've been doing them outside of the production of your comics. So I don't think you have to necessarily make a choice between the two. I think you can still do them, but I think you need to do whatever it takes to give you the best product, and faster is nicer too.
Well, let me speak a little bit to my own personal thing. And Brad, I'm curious to hear what you say about this, because I have found doing Sheldon traditional and doing Drive digital,
Mhm.
that they inform one another in the
Really?
sense that I think my digital art makes my traditional art better, and my traditional art makes my digital art better. Do you know what I mean? Like over the course of a couple of years, I'm like, each one levels the other one up. Does that work for you? Have you gotten better traditional
No.
by drawing?
No, that didn't happen with me.
But to be fair though, you've kind of stopped drawing traditional, right?
Yes,
Like, but I'm saying if Melissa keeps it up.
Oh yeah, if you kept doing it. Yeah.
And so here's another thing that I actually I will pass along a little thing that you might want to try, Melissa, which is, let's say you draw the line art perfectly digital. It's ready to go, but you don't color it yet. What you do is you get yourself a good printer, like one of those nice Epsons or something like that, and you print it out on whatever traditional paper you used to use, but at like 5% opacity. Like you can barely see that line art, but then you apply your traditional colors to that 5% opacity printout. And then digitally, you scan that, you merge them. So you have the best of digital on a layer above the best of your traditional art. I'm just saying that's a possibility you might want to explore. It's kind of like, Brad, the way, I don't know if I ever described it to you, how Watterson would do the watercolors for his covers, which just sounded like a descent into madness. He would do like 15 versions of trying to line up a separate line art to his watercolors, which is just, but anyway, Melissa, with digital, and with good printing, I think you could do a 5% opacity, 10% opacity, print it out, and then apply your traditional colors and then merge the two. What do you think, Brad?
Oh, I think you could do that with a light box too, quite frankly.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I forgot about light boxes. Oh, Brad, you mean that 100-year-old technology that works just fine? I forgot about that.
Yeah. There are those. But I wonder, Dave, if you're, because you shared some thoughts with me quite a while ago about what you called your 70% rule. And I'm wondering if that would apply to this situation.
Yes. So this is something I've been meaning to talk about, which is very often when illustrators get into comic strips, they're very slow because they're used to illustrating at 100% of their skill level. Like every line is going to be perfect. Every brushstroke is going to be just note perfect. And here's the thing, though, to produce comics, one of the things that is often required, but very often not spoken aloud, is you need to have speed. You need to get it done faster. And so one of the reasons why Melissa, this idea that you can do it faster digitally is so important is because comics, you kind of want to be drawing your comics, and this is kind of unsaid for a reason, at 70 to 80% of your ability. You're not always given 100%. You're getting out what needs to get the communication across in the best way possible, but not at your note perfect drawing. Like it's not, if you're producing a Marvel book at that pace where you got to crank them out, not every Batman is going to be the most shining Batman you've ever drawn. Some of them are going to be, maybe there's a Wally Wood silhouette that comes in at every time because you got to get the story done. And so what I'm getting at is with this digital question is one of the reasons you might be faster is you might be allowing yourself to draw at 70 or 80% of your capacity, not 100% like you did traditionally, because it's that change of venue is allowing you that mental switch up. And I think that might be to your benefit, Melissa.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. Well, Dave, we've got one more question and a little bit of time here at the end of the show, and I want to hear what you've got to say about this one. This one comes in from our Patreon backer, Octagon, who says this: I want to bring up the topic of page-to-page pacing. More specifically, how much is too much and how little is too little. For context, the way I make my comic draws inspiration from highly decompressed manga storytelling. Even though I release pages frequently, I'm often worried that each individual update might be insubstantial. I make sure each page moves the story forward, but I fear that in many cases, the progress may be too fractional. My peers have told me they can't stand reading my comic as it comes out and simply prefers to wait for the chapter to be done before binging it. I'm okay with this as I'm primarily pacing it for the archival reader anyway, but it does cause me to ponder the notion how much content should each page contain. I'm aware that my approach is absolutely not the norm for comics released for the web, and that a more compressed approach is preferred by both readers and apparently by authors. So, Dave, let's talk pacing. How fast is too fast? How slow is too slow?
Well, I have a question for you, Brad,
Yeah.
before we answer Octagon's question,
Yeah.
which is, how do you understand the phrase decompressed manga storytelling? What does that mean to you? Because I'm not sure that I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with what decompress, because Octagon's diction is amazing here, but I didn't quite gather what decompressed storytelling manga style is.
So decompressed storytelling is usually like you take a minute and then you expand on that minute. It's almost like going into slow motion. So a minute might take 3 pages to go through. When I hear decompressed manga storytelling, what I think of is when my kids were younger, they used to watch Dragon Ball Z. And I would walk through the bedroom, or I'd walk through the living room doing like laundry or something. And at the beginning of the show, I'd be bringing laundry downstairs, and there'd be these 2 characters floating over a canyon, because I think canyons were easy to draw.
Yeah,
and
a lot of sand, a lot of easy sand. Yeah.
And they'd be like taunting each other and saying, well, I'm going to fight you, and well, I'm going to fight you. You don't know about my power. My power is very powerful. You don't know about my power. It's very powerful. And I'd do the laundry, and then the drying, and then the folding, and I'd bring the clothes back upstairs, and they'd still be taunting each other an hour later. And I'm like, when are these 2 putzes going to actually, throw a punch? And, my kids will say, well, probably tomorrow. That's the next episode. I'm like, what is taking so long? Get to the point. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is very popular and very fun to watch, also has very decompressed storyline where all of a sudden, like somebody's about to throw a punch, and then the action will stop, it'll pull back, and you'll see one character, the guy that's about to take it right in the skillet, do a monologue. This guy's throwing a punch. I can't believe he's throwing a punch at me. This punch is really going to hurt. I can't believe how badly I'm going to lose teeth. And it'll go on like that for like 10 minutes of storytelling. And then finally they jump back in and he punches them. And you go, what's going on here?
I can tell you what's going on here. It costs 100,000 yen to animate a fight scene. It costs 10,000 yen to animate just the mouth moving and a little bit of sand drifting across the cell. So that's your difference right there. You can get a lot of show for not a lot of money. There's a reason why they reuse the He-Man intro every show. It's because it didn't cost any extra money. But yeah, okay, so now you've explained decompressed storytelling, which is that expansion of a moment where nothing hugely consequential has happened to explore usually inner monologue. I think so now we're on the same page about it. Okay, thank you about that. So it's a little bit like soap operas, right? In that nothing happens because really the point of a soap opera is not to have things happen. It's to relish the drama of the moment, even if that moment takes 5 months to tell, right?
Yeah. Or newspaper comics like Apartment 3G or the Spider-Man newspaper comic, where the format was the first panel was a recap, the second panel was storytelling, and the third panel was like a premonition for the next panel.
Can I tell you a little story about? So my hometown paper ran the Spider-Man comic strip, right?
Yeah.
He started a fight with the Sandman, Brad. I went off to college in Indiana at Notre Dame. 4 years later, I come home and start reading that hometown paper again. He's finishing up that fight with the Sandman. It took 4 years to fight the Sandman in the Spider-Man comic strip. Okay.
Later that same day.
I guess in asking that question, what's nice is I think I figured out an answer for Octagon here, which is one of the reasons why your friends or peers, I guess you were saying, you said, my peers have told me that they can't stand reading my comic as it comes out and simply prefer to wait for the chapter to be done before binging it. So that's telling me, without having read the comic, there might not be much happening. That's why people are not tuning in, right? Another way to say decompressed storytelling, I would guess, is to say there ain't much going on here. There's not a lot of there. And so yes, you can tell a story that way. Yes, it is satisfying to read it in big chunks. But here's the problem in doing that with the way we tell stories. When it comes time to ask for patronage, when it comes time to kickstart a book, when it comes time to sell a book, you have to have sold people all along the way to get them to go in big at the end, right? And if your storytelling is such that it reads like this, all right, you're bored now, but eventually you're going to love it. you're not going to have built the audience that will be there for you when it comes time to Kickstart. Am I wrong in thinking this, Brad?
No, you're right. I'm gonna say the same thing. Your friends just told you they can't stand reading your comic as it comes out on the web, right? They prefer to read it in a binge. Imagine if they weren't your friends, what they'd be saying. And that's your readers.
Yikes. Yeah.
That's your readers, right? I can't stand this thing. It's so slow. You're saying you're building this thing for the archival reader, but if you didn't capture them somehow, if you didn't entice them, there's nobody reading those archives. You can build it for the archival reader. I don't know where that reader's coming from.
Yeah, they do exist, but I think what Brad and I are saying is there's a risk you run that if you never give the Costco sampler in a way that entices a Costco shopper, they're never going to buy those potato chips in bulk. You got to keep the samplers interesting in order to get them to make the big purchase at the end.
The archival reader exists in general. They exist in theory.
Yes.
They just don't exist as a part of your audience yet. You got to get them there, right? You got to get them in there. So here's the deal. Your peers are giving you really good feedback. And listen, I don't think I'm going to change your mind because I keep seeing sentences like this. I'm aware that my approach is absolutely not the norm for comics released for the web. And a more compressed approach is preferred. Yeah. You know why? Because it works, because it's effective, and we like doing things that work. I can't imagine I'm going to change your mind on this. So the only thing I'm going to tell you is that you can do this decompressed story. You can do all of that. What you can't do is be surprised when your Kickstarter doesn't go over, when you can't get people involved in a Patreon, and your website itself doesn't have a whole lot of traffic. You can't be surprised by that because it's not impossible. You still could do it. Remember, the number one thing is do a good comic. If you do a good comic that's amazing and decompressed, you can still pull this off. It might take you a little longer, but you can still do it. But what you can't do is be surprised that this thing isn't getting traction, because a lot of the choices that you're consciously making are making it harder for you to build an audience the way we build audience today.
Right. And so I think I have nothing really to add to that point. That was a perfect summation of that. But I will add Brad's own advice on here to the topping, which is try, even with decompressed storytelling, try to make every update a satisfying update on some level.
Yeah.
Is it a beautiful drawing to look at? Is it emotionally a big arc for the character in that moment, right? That page gives you a twist or a turn. Is it a punch that was a dramatic moment? Is it a comedic twist that makes you laugh at the end of that page? If every page has a satisfying update, then even if it's very decompressed storytelling, which I think is still possible, you can have an internal monologue, Brad, that every page ends in a joke, or every page ends in a dramatic reveal, or every page. What I'm getting at is there might be ways to do it where you still are decompressed, but every page is satisfying. It just gets, it's a little harder, I think. But
yeah, I don't want to pick apart what you said too much, but I want to come back to this. You said, well, maybe it's a beautifully drawn page. Time out. It's got to be more than that. You can give me a beautifully drawn page of nothing happening, and it still is nothing happening. It's got to be more. It's got to be about the writing here. We've got to think about storytelling.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong.
It can't. What?
I said, no, you're not wrong. You're not. You're right. I should just say you're right. Sorry.
All I heard was, no, you're wrong. And I'm like,
no.
I pissed him off.
No. You're right. You're right. The writing is more important. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can't. It can't be just a beautifully drawn page. Something's got to happen. And this might mean that you really like. I don't know how many panels are on your page. Like, for example, if you're doing a 3-panel page. That still gives you could do 3 pages in an Instagram update because you're limited to 10 individual images on a carousel, right? So you could release 3 pages at a time for that. It's going to be harder to do on Twitter. And unfortunately, you know how I think about Instagram. I don't think there's a lot of audience building to be done there. There are what I'm trying to get at is there may be some ways that you release several pages at a time. So you can get more of a bang for your buck in terms of storytelling if this is slower. But honest to goodness, I think you do have to consider at least this fact that you might need to kind of step up the pace a little bit. And if not, then follow your dream, follow the way you want to do this.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe prove us wrong.
Exactly. If this is the way, by the way, this is always the default for any time Brad and I give an answer. If you are finding joy and passion and a reward by telling a story differently than how Brad and I describe it, then follow your heart by all means. Like art should not be some punishment that you got to follow what Dave and Brad say to do. So if this is bringing you joy to do it that way, then by all means do it. I think what I was trying to say is one of the reasons why an Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes story really works as a full holistic story is because he made sure each one of those damn updates in the press was a really good standalone read. And so that actually makes the overall story better because there were a lot of twists and turns and exciting moments for Sherlock or Watson or whatever the hell was going on in those episodic updates, which we can immediately translate into webcomics. If all your updates are interesting, clever, have a twist, have dramatic moments, have comedic moments, have satisfying endings, then your overall story is going to have that. Yes. And yes, you might be creating more of a comic of the mind, a comic of the interior of thoughts. But I'll be honest, that's just for me, not what I turn to in comics. But there is an audience for that. Absolutely, there's a lot of people in like Fantagraphics kind of world that produce those kind of comics. They're not for me, but if that brings you joy, then by all means, chase that dragon.
Yeah. Although, yes, I agree 100%. It's not with David and I, you're always going to see us trying to release something that when you come to the end, it's very satisfying. Having said that, we've come to the end of this podcast, and I'm very satisfied to tell you that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Oh my goodness, your hosts have been just the silky smooth Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
I have to say, Brad, whenever you have a transition that's that smooth, I always think about the fact that my ophthalmologist, when I first started doing contacts, and I had that common fear of like I couldn't get my finger near or on my eye to get the contact in, he said, don't worry about it. Olga's going to help you. And Olga was this kind old Russian nurse that took me by the hand. She's like, I'm going to teach you how to put the contact in your eye. And it was like 20 minutes of Svetlana guiding me. And that's how I feel whenever you have this transition. It's like, I'm in safe hands. I know that I'm going to be treated well with Brad's transitions. Anyway, with that weird note, I'm going to say the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that like Olga, the Russian nurse at my ophthalmologist, patreon.com/don't poke yourself in the eye. That's a key part. That's a key part. Don't, no with the fingernails. Yes, with the soft, fleshy part of your finger. Listen, are you dumb? Don't do it that way.
You're still poking. Stop poking.
Stop poking. Stop poking. Are you trying to poke the bear? What are you doing? Paul done made this moonshine down by the creek.
My dad says crick. Like if
Crick?
you ask him what town Kellogg's makes Frosted Flakes in, it's Battle Creek.
You're kidding. Is that a Michigan thing or is he not from Michigan?
He's from Michigan. Oh, he's definitely from Michigan.
Battle Creek, Michigan. I mean, you can't say crick without getting a little Tennessee in there.
Yeah, it's and I don't know where it comes from. Like all of the other EEK words come out normal. Like he doesn't say, well, here it is. It's the middle of the wick. It's everything else comes out normal, but Battle Creek, you cannot tell him. And when we were teenagers, we were embarrassed. Dad, it's not Battle Creek. Say Battle Creek. And then, of course, he just said Creek all the more.
Is it possible that your dad just has a vocal tick?
Is it possible that not only does he have a vocal tick, but it's genetic? Yeah.